Hey everyone, this is Randy Kim from the Banh Mi Chronicles podcast, and it gives me pleasure to introduce to you another fellow Khmer podcaster. And I've been very excited to have this person on for quite some time, and her name is Dorothy Chow. Dorothy Chow is a Cambodian American podcast host, storyteller, and advocate dedicated to intergenerational healing. She is the creator and host of Death in Cambodia, Life in America, a critically acclaimed narrative podcast that chronicles her father's survival of the Khmer Rouge genocide and her family's journey rebuilding life in the U.S. This podcast has received over 100,000 downloads, gaining international attention and features on outlets like CBS Sunday Morning. As a first generation Cambodian American, Dorothy speaks passionately on generational trauma and the power of personal narratives, and is committed to elevating underrepresented voices through her work. It gives me a pleasure to have you on. Thank you. How have you been doing this year as we are now going to be leading up to 2026, if you can believe it?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me and that wonderful introduction. This year has been quite a journey. I think it's been, what is it, probably 3 or 4 years now that I've been doing the podcast.
Mhm.
And so a lot of this year has been kind of reflecting on what I want to do next and what I want to do differently, what things I want to change. We've created different programs underneath the Death in Cambodia umbrella, such as Khmer Courageous Conversations and um, survival stories. But I felt like this year has been a lot of me looking back at the programs and seeing what I can improve.
Mm. Yeah, and I think as I've learned about your podcast last few years, especially since I stepped out of it, I also actually like listened to some of your episodes with your father, which I think is something that I really want to dig into. But also I want to acknowledge Chad Samet, a
Mhm.
mutual friend and who had passed away back like in late August, early September, and I know that I had listened to his podcast, Kamai Trees, which I do recommend. I think what he was doing with that podcast really hits on so many Kamai creatives. I think he was trying to get 100 folks on, and he got to 75, which, hey, that was the legacy he left. And I'm glad that he had you on. Um, and I also want to offer a trigger warning that this conversation can or will contain conversations surrounding genocide. So, when you listen to it, please be gentle with yourself. And yeah, I'm very curious about what led you to create a podcast and also with your father, because I think what's very unique about it is it's not very common to have a Khmer parent, being in this medium, in this platform with a child or an adult child talking about the genocide in a very public space. I have definitely seen it in like more like in real person experiences, like in through the Cambodian Museum in Chicago and other spaces. But I'm also like very curious, how did that come about, and how did your father agree to join in on this conversation?
I think when I look back on it, it was the perfect storm that really brought this project together. It was a COVID project. And so, one, we had a lot of time on our hands. Normally, my dad and I are generally pretty busy people. And so, had it been, just normal everyday life, I don't know if we would have carved out time for it the way that we did, but it was COVID
Hmm.
and we were bored. Um, I've always been a fan of history. Like history has always been my favorite subject, even in school. And so I remember growing up being very intrigued by what my dad had gone through. So, I mean, the curiosity has always been there, even when I was little. Um, COVID happened, I had moved back home, and I just kind of had something inside of me that thought, maybe this is the time for me to kind of tackle that curiosity that I've always had.
Mhm.
I thought about doing a blog, but I never really was super confident in my writing skills. So I was
Mhm.
like, maybe blog is going to be too difficult. I thought about maybe just starting an Instagram page that would collect some of his quotes that he would talk about, but it didn't really, none of those mediums really panned out. And so I was like, maybe at the time during COVID, podcasting was just really getting started. And
Mhm.
I literally Googled how to start a podcast and watched a few YouTube videos and put something together. And next thing you knew, I had, a mic, a table, um, and I invited my dad over and I was like, hey, why don't we just, click record and see where this goes? Um, Episode 0, which is the very first thing that you will hear
Mhm.
when you click on my podcast, is the very, very first time that we had ever clicked record, ever. And
Mhm.
so it's a really cute little snippet. It's like 10 seconds, but it's like, hello, can you hear me? Ba, can you hear me? And he's like, yeah, yeah, I can hear you. And I'm like, wow, like, so it's us like playing with our mics, and it was
Aw.
really, really cute. Um, it was a perfect storm, really. We had COVID, so I had time. I had curiosity and passion, and then my dad had a genuine want to share his story.
Mhm.
Um, he had looked up previous biographers who, those people that you can hire, that you can share your story to, and you can, they would turn it into a book. I had read a couple of those snippets from some of the authors who had agreed to write his story, and none of them had presented his story in the way that I feel like was good enough.
Mhm.
So he had a genuine want to share his story,
Mhm.
but he also was kind of struggling to find the medium of like, okay, who is going
Mhm.
to tell my story in the most authentic way?
Mhm.
And so it was all those three pieces that really came together that brought us to what the podcast is today.
Wow, that is incredible. And I like wonder, did you have any public speaking experiences? Did you have any experiences like that led you to podcasting in a way like, you know what, maybe I could actually do this work? Was this a space that you felt comfortable doing? Because I know with COVID, when it began, like I think I started my podcast several months before that, and I didn't even realize that that was going to happen, and that, you know, really made me to continue doing that work. But I'm very curious about what your experience was prior to the podcasting.
Nothing
Oh,
actually.
wow.
Yeah, I did not have any public speaking skills, although I think speaking in general, I've always felt pretty confident in. Like I've never, even in high school and stuff, when I did speeches for school, I never really was like that nervous. Whereas maybe some people would get really, really nervous public speaking. It just never really was something that really, really kind of
Mm,
hit my nerves. Um, so I did feel confident about speaking, and so that's why when it came to time to look for a medium, I thought about the different mediums, but to me, I just thought podcasting would be the easiest because I could just turn on a button and I can just start talking.
mhm,
So yeah, no, I didn't have any prior experience.
mm. I think about like when you started this podcast, for your father, when he was actually trying to find someone to help write his memoir, I also think about how oftentimes the stories of the Vietnam War, the Laos Civil War, the Cambodian genocide have also been like told from a very white lens. And I think that when we think of stories from our people, there's a lot of power to that because it's making sure that our narratives are told in an authentic way, but also that actually paints or brings life from the experiences of folks that went through this. And I think that's incredibly important. What did you, when did you first learn about your father's story about him surviving the genocide? And what was that like for you to receive that information, to receive that knowledge?
I had heard snippets of my father's experience He never officially said that he had survived a genocide, but there was always like an elephant in the room. And I
Hmm.
think that's quite common amongst, Khmer kids growing up, um, where it was something that you knew something really bad happened in the past, but you never
Hmm.
truly understood or never really knew what. It's not like we learned about it in history books. People would talk about the Vietnam War, but again, through the lens of the American experience. And so, the Vietnam War, definitely no history about the Lao
Hmm.
bombs, the war that happened there, and barely about the genocide, if that, if anything. So I felt like a lot of this was kind of following the curiosity and piecing things together. My dad occasionally would share maybe one or two sentences
Hmm.
during a dinner. Usually, we'd all sit at the table and then he'd like sip his glass of wine.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden he'd kind of look away and then he would say something like, when I was a teenager, I watched my best friend die.
Hmm.
And then no context. It was just
Hmm.
one of those things that he would just let out, and
Hmm.
the entire table really didn't know how to handle it. Like I didn't really know how to handle it because it was like, oh, wow, like that's crazy. And then he would say one other small thing, and then we would go back to normal. So it was like he was regressing for
Hmm.
bits and pieces, but never fully letting himself share the full thing, probably because it just hurt so much. So
Hmm.
I didn't really know how to handle it, and that curiosity kind of stayed with me as I got older.
Hmm. I think that's a very interesting experience that you're sharing here because I have heard this from other Khmer folks, my peers, and they would say, yeah, my mom would just talk about it just randomly and saying, like, if it's, let's say it's Chicago winter, they're like, yeah, I remember not having shoes on, or like when it's, or like a Chicago hot summer, that is. And I remembered having no shoes on for 4 years, and like these random comments. And from myself, I learned about the genocide when I first saw the televised Pol Pot interview, which I know that you had talked with the interviewer, and that was 1997. I was 14 years old at the time, and I remember it's coming downstairs. My dad was watching, and his eyes were glued, and he said, "This guy tried to kill me," and and he had this sullen look on his face. And then the next day, next morning, he said, "I cannot sleep." And I
Mm,
think since then, I realized the gradual change in him over the years that it started to take over. And when I would get into fights with my dad, that's when he would bring up the genocide.
mm,
He would use it to weaponize. So if I start arguing with him, his response would be like, "Well, I lost 20 members of my family. You don't understand this, blah blah blah." And I'm just like taken aback. I'm like, "Is he making this up?" And then
mhm,
there was some gaslighting on my end, which I deeply regretted because our relationship was so toxic, but the way he raised me was out of fierce protection. He was afraid of me going to the other side, me joining a gang or me falling through the cracks or, being poisoned. I mean, that was how serious it was growing up. And so I think for myself, I was both curious about the history, but I was also repelled by it. I was very much like, why should I even bother to learn Cambodian? Why should I bother to like really be in front of the community that has so much harm and so much um that has caused so much damage to my father. So I wonder about how did your father's experience um affected the way you were raised by your both of your parents in this case?
yeah, no, that's a great question. I think very similarly to a lot of Southeast Asian kid experiences who have parents who had survived war and who had survived very horrible things. It is unfortunate, but majority of them still struggle with how to approach that trauma that still lives within them. And unhealed trauma
Hmm.
manifests itself in so many different ways. One of them being the most common, I feel like, is parenting out of fear,
Mm-hmm.
right? Their reality is not 100% this reality
Mm-hmm.
because they know and have hung on to a period of time where they truly were in this warped, like violent, very dark, unusual time in life, and time in history, actually. And so, yeah, I did grow up with a dad who parented from a place of fear,
Mm-hmm.
and as well. So, especially being a girl, I grew up under very, very strict rules. Like I couldn't go out and see friends. I wasn't allowed to go to prom. I wasn't I had to sneak out for a lot of like just like socializing with my
Mm-hmm.
friends. Like it just wasn't allowed. And
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't wear skirts over a certain, you know, over a certain height. I couldn't get my ears pierced until I was like 16. So it was I held a lot of resentment for my parents,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't at the time understand why, because I didn't know the trauma, and I didn't understand the trauma that they had yet to process because no one talked about it, and no, the history books didn't talk about it. So, in a lot of ways, one of the things that I'm most proud of with this podcast is that this fully allowed me to understand who my father is.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first time after recording with him for 8 months, I actually understood why maybe my childhood wasn't the way that I had maybe wanted it to be
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
expected it to be. And I do hope that other people around the world can use this story and use these interviews as a way to also build that bridge of empathy with their parents. Because um, if we don't know, how are we ever going to know? I mean, we were born
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
We've never survived a war. We don't know
Mm-hmm.
what it's like to starve. And that doesn't negate our pain, but without fully understanding, without fully hearing the story, like how are we supposed to know?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, So it is one of the things that I'm very, very proud of that came out of this podcast.
Yeah. And kudos to you for that because one of the things I've told people when I did my second season, I think it was the 45 year of, I was covering like the Vietnamese, Lao, Hmong, and Cambodian folks that season. And one of the things I used to say is that time is not on our side. And we're now in 50 year mark. And I think about how I don't want to leave, or I don't want to, or when the time comes when my parents are not here, I don't want to be walking around with question marks. And I think that's something that has stayed with me for quite some time. I think this is something that has resonated with so many second 1.5 to second generation Khmer American folks or Khmer diaspora folks that are living in this existence. One thing I did hear about is your mom and that how your mom has to this day not talked about the genocide. What has that been like for you to try to somehow bring up that experience, but also when she sees you and your dad talking about the genocide very openly?
She is very, very supportive in her, she's very supportive and she loves seeing how far this whole thing has gotten. Um, my mom and I are close, are very close. Um, Even during, certain periods of my life where I felt like I held a lot of resentment for my dad, I was always close to my mom.
Mm,
So she sees it from afar. I had asked her to come on many times, as I had mentioned, and she's not interested. Um, and I can tell that, unfortunately,
mm,
different people and different survivors process it differently.
mhm,
I think for my father, it was really, really, the main thing was he wanted to share his story. He
Hmm.
wanted something to come out of all the pain that he had gone through. My my mom, I think her way of dealing it has just been to shut the door completely,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and I can tell that it's so painful for her. Like
Hmm.
sometimes I even ask her very, very general questions
Hmm.
with the mic off. This is just like between me and her.
Hmm.
And she just instantly like freezes and she kind of drifts to a different place and then she kind of like
Hmm.
shakes her head, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I have to be sensitive about that because,
Hmm.
women, especially women,
Hmm.
had it very, very hard,
Hmm.
especially young women
Hmm.
during the war, as you can imagine
Hmm.
the kind of atrocities that happened to young women at that time. So I don't blame, I don't blame maybe if women had a harder time sharing their Khmer Rouge stories.
Hmm.
And not saying that men had it bad, but it's just, unfortunately, if you were a teenager or a young woman at that time period, that was just not the place to be at
Hmm.
all. And so I don't know what she has lived through. I know that she was a young woman, a young
Hmm.
girl at that time,
Hmm.
um and that's gonna have to be okay with me too,
Yeah.
I can't you can't force people to talk about things they don't want to talk about. And so,
Right.
that's why I have so many people who come up to me and ask me like, whoa, what's the guide to get your parents to open up? I'm
Hmm.
like, I really don't have any guide. I don't feel
Hmm.
comfortable giving one either because there probably isn't one because
Yeah.
every single parent, every survivor deals with it differently.
Hmm.
And so, who am I to say these are the one, two, three steps to get somebody to open up? It's just,
Right.
the things that I have learned through this process. The one thing that I have learned is if you want to try, if you want to get your parents to open up, they have to know that they are in a safe space for them to be vulnerable. So don't ask them in front of a crowd. Don't ask them in front of maybe even a bunch of family members.
Hmm.
Do it quietly and do it with seriousness, right? With
Hmm.
like intent to learn. Because every single time that you ask a parent to peel back a layer, you are taking them back to a traumatic time. You are making them hurt, and
Hmm.
they don't mind, but they need to know that they're doing it for a purpose. And so
Hmm.
for my father, I think the reason why he opened up so easily maybe is also I had put in the work to create the space for him.
Hmm.
I had bought the mics. I had connected the thing. I've done my research. Like I'm not just like, hey, Ba, like what'd you live through? No, I'm like, here's the quiet space. Like let's actually do this. So
Hmm.
um it's different for every parent and that's gonna
Hmm.
happen with me.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you taking on this journey and modeling what it has looked like for you. And to your point, it's every parent has a different way of processing, and there's something to be said that when you open the box, how do we close it together? And I think that's something that resonates with me. When I first met Ocean Vuong, like in 2016, and at that time, I was trying to figure out my dad's story. I was trying to write about it. And I asked him a question, and I said, how is it that you were able to get your mom to tell you her story? Because she was illiterate, she couldn't write.
Right.
And then the first thing he said was, to consider asking a parent is considered betrayal to them. You're making them relive a past that you had no part of. And
Yeah.
that just, I felt that knife just stuck into my heart when I heard that. I was so floored by that. And I want to have a conversation with Ocean ever since then, but he's on Oprah. I think I'm kind of out of reach by now. But but I think that's something that really a lot of our community members do struggle with because we are at the 50-year mark. And our parents, our uncles, aunts, grandparents, they're aging. A lot of the adult survivors are now in their 70s in transitioning. And so I think that's something that your podcast came in right at a very important time. Have you also, I don't know if you have siblings, but or other family members that you talk to about, the experience of the genocide. I wonder how have you been able to navigate those conversations with other family spaces?
Um, I think out of my entire family, I'm probably the most passionate about this. And so, um, it's been quite a journey for me because I I don't live next to a whole lot of family members in the Bay Area. Most of them are actually in Southern California. And so we're kind of like in our own little bubble up here in Northern. Um, and so I also grew up not really being super proud of being Cambodian.
Mm,
And I also actually grew up not really even saying I was Cambodian to people
mm,
until I really started this project.
mm,
My parents, when we were growing up, they would speak Khmer to each other, but they would tell me if anyone asked, I should say that I'm Chinese. And I am Chinese,
mm,
actually. I'm Chinese Cambodian. And I went to Chinese school, and a lot of we've kept Chinese traditions within the family, but it's really interesting because I feel like I didn't really start telling people I was Cambodian until probably like 5 or 6 years ago.
wow.
And so this is a very, very new identity, I feel like, that um, I am still developing.
Hmm.
A lot of it, though, has come from the fact that I had spent so much time learning about my dad, my parents, even my grandparents. Like we ate Cambodian food at home, and I heard the Khmer language all around me, you know what I mean? But I didn't feel like I grew up with anything really beyond that. So a lot of um a lot of my identity has really changed and shifted just within the past 5, 6 years. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it's very interesting to see how a lot of us adult kids have come to a more recent point of trying to reclaim what they felt was lost. And I think for me, like my Cambodian experience, like as a 42-year-old now, I did not get involved with the Cambodian community until I was in my 30s already. And with the Vietnamese community too, because I think for such a long time I had such an aversion to it. I did not feel like I would belong in either space. I felt that the tensions between those two countries are very obvious, so it never made me feel comfortable. And being a queer person on top of it also made me uncomfortable. But I think when I came back to Cambodia and Vietnam, Cambodia for the first time in December, it just did something to me. It was a very magical experience. I wonder if you had that experience of being able to visit the ancestral homeland, and if so, what did it feel for you? And if not, what do you hope to step into?
Yeah, I actually have not gone back to Cambodia as an adult.
Mm,
And especially in the past 5 years, it's been trust such a transformation for me with like this project and the podcast and all the people that I've met and kind of like my place and space in the community at this point. It would be a life-changing trip to
hmm.
go. And I actually did plan to go last year, but that didn't end up working out. So I'm
Oh,
hoping to maybe go this upcoming year, but we'll see how that goes. And so I feel like also too, because I have met so many different people now, and because I have built up there has been so many changes in the past 5 years with my identity and my relationship with Cambodia. I almost feel like when I make this trip, when it happens, I'm gonna have just like so much content to create, like things to do, people to meet, because it's like, the first time that I went to Cambodia, I was in middle school, and that was a long time ago. And I haven't been back since, and that's just a different experience now that I've gone through this. So, um, I am sure that when that trip happens, it's going to be life-changing for me.
Mm-hmm. Were you planning, are you planning to go with your father as well?
Yeah, so we're
Mm,
trying to go together, and if we go, it's gonna be a whole thing. I'm gonna try to meet as many people as possible and film, maybe even, hire a videographer to come with me and follow me as I kind of revisit these places because I'd love to
mm,
share, this community that we've created has has watched me through my journey. And
mm-hmm,
so I definitely want to bring them a part with me
mm-hmm,
to actually go to the motherland.
mm-hmm.
So when I go, everyone's gonna hear about it. They'll see it all over because
I can't wait.
everyone will come with me.
I can't wait to be on that journey. I can't wait to live vicariously through it because when I went to Cambodia, like I did not have family members to visit. I did not go with anyone. So I was intent on doing this on my own and just learning to experience it in a way that I feel like I have control over um and not be obligated by other folks. And but yeah, I remembered one moment, and I was very emotional. I'm sure there's going to be moments because there's certain things that would just hit you. And I remember when I left um Siem Reap, and my hotel driver, he was like a few years younger than me. He was very sweet, and I was on my way to Phnom Penh, and I was getting dropped off at the airport. It was sunrise, and he was asking me about what do you think of Siem Reap so far? And I told him I didn't think people would ask if I was Khmer. I had never gotten that until I got there. I mean, when I went to Vietnam, no one thought I was Vietnamese. They just started speaking English to me. So I was really taken aback. And then he said something to me, and he was like, when our people come back, we treat them as family. And next thing you know, once I got to the airport, I found a domestic terminal. I just bawled my eyes out for the next 2 hours. I was calling friends. I was like, I am really hitting very hard. And also, Phnom Penh was a place that my dad escaped from, and so I was already feeling intensity that day, and I just could not stop crying. And I think I had to get to a good point or to get to a good place. But I think everyone's experience is very different. But I do think there's something so powerful in being able to see the different people that you come across. And I think that one thing I've learned is don't have expectations. Just go there with an open mind, and you'd be surprised to see who you come across along the way. And I wonder about like the conversations you'll have with Cambodian folks, whether it's about the genocide or about the present day Cambodia, which sometimes I think, and I talked to Kenneth from the Vietnamese podcast about this. Like we both get very tired about the Vietnam War, the genocide, like letting it be our identity marker, and there's a frustrating part of it because we need to preserve history, we need to talk about it, and at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm like, but we're doing cool shit, we're doing cool things, and we want to highlight that too. So
Yeah.
I think that I think that's going to be a very interesting experience, to see it in this manner. So I cannot wait to see it unfold because, it's going to be a heck of a journey. And I think anybody who goes through it, to any of their homeland, I hope it becomes a very fruitful experience, and then to come back to it, you really become different in the way you approach your own community. So, yeah. Um, so when we are talking about the 50-year anniversary, what has the conversation been like with other Cambodian folks? I know you had alluded to um, folks asking you, how can I get my parents to talk about it? Um, what conversations have you noticed, or what have you observed that's been very common among a lot of our peers?
Well, I think we are in a very exciting time when we think about these different Cambodian Americans, and I say Cambodian Americans because that's just the world that I'm in, um, who are reclaiming their identity in different ways, trying their best to kind of rewrite the narrative on what it means to be Cambodian, trying to bring pride back to what it to being Cambodian, whether that be through food, whether that be through art and music, or Instagram platforms. I'm sure you follow the infamous Instagram page Khmer Renaissance,
Hmm.
who has constantly coined just kind of keep walking con Khmer,
Yeah.
and just what that means. Because I think for the first time, we are far enough away from the war to finally look back at it and start to kind of question in the
Hmm.
ways that it has impacted us as adults. When our parents never had that option because they're
Hmm.
still very much in it. They lived through it. They
Hmm.
haven't even healed from it. They're too close to it. But us, we have grown up and we have all become adults, and we have the privilege and just enough distance to finally analyze exactly what happened there. And so we're in this time where we are so many second generation 1.5ers are using that energy as fuel to create different things. So it's a beautiful time, I think, to be a Southeast
Hmm.
Asian.
Hmm.
It's very, very cool to see all these different people um, doing, as you said before, cool shit that's happening. And it's 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 a coin and it's a sign to see how far we have come. I'm just really excited that we are having these conversations, like you said, about the impact of the war, the impact of how it impacted our parents who had parented us, and the intergenerational trauma that we may have inherited, and what does that mean, and how can we make sure that that doesn't pass down to our future kids and the next generation? And so I'm glad that we're able to have these conversations because without the conversations and if we keep treating it like nothing happened, we're never gonna heal from it, and it's just gonna keep being passed down.
Mm. One of the experiences I remembered when I would interview fellow Khmer friends, colleagues, and in talking about the genocide, I, as a podcaster, started getting a lot of vicarious trauma through it. Like, I don't think that there are episodes that would get me very emotionally drained until I actually interview a fellow Khmer person. And to share these stories is so intense. I wonder how you, when you go into different spaces, where you do talks or whether you do spaces, um, for other folks that want to learn how to talk about their stories. How do you handle or navigate through the vicarious trauma of it all? Because I know that for a lot of our own peers, it is tough. I mean, I remembered even being on the museum board, every time April 17th comes by, I would get very depressed for a couple of days. Like I would be in charge of these events, doing a talk, and it was always great to be around other Khmer folks. But then but when I go home and the next day, I'm just like, I feel really sad. I feel really heavy. And to the point where I stopped doing these events on April 17th because it really hits me very hard. And I wonder about for you when you're navigating, deal with the anniversary to the people that you come across in the diaspora.
Um, maybe I'm lucky that when I was interviewing my father, I had also started therapy. Um, I tell people that yes, the third week of releasing episodes, we went viral,
Mhm.
but the third week is also when I started my therapy journey.
Mm,
Because I I there was no way that I could process what my father was telling me because I was hearing his story for the first time too,
mhm,
along with everyone else, along with me releasing the episodes. Like it was live for me as
mhm,
well. And it was a lot for me to take in to know what his exact experience was. And I needed help to kind of process all of that.
mm,
So I recorded for 8 months. I also did therapy for over 8 months, like close to a
mhm,
year and a half. And I actually really am thankful that I was, I know therapy is not cheap, but I'm
mhm,
thankful that I'm able to have that experience and that I had that alongside my recording because it was like deep work healing during
mhm,
that entire time. And I was able to really learn and pick out pieces of my childhood, pieces of the way that I was raised, and essentially forgive myself, forgive my father, and like heal those pieces. And I think that has allowed me, honestly, to be a better podcaster, be stronger when it comes to having conversations with other people, only because now I'm not I hate to say the word fully healed, but
mhm,
I've done a little bit of healing.
mhm,
And I've fleshed out a little bit of it.
mhm,
And so it's given me a little bit more strength when it comes to talking about the topics and because I've had to actually really dissect it during that time period.
mm. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that too. Because I think that therapy is very important. I think that's something that we don't talk enough of. We don't talk about the intergenerational effects that it has on us. And I think that's also very important to have therapists very um who are very trauma informed, especially when it comes to war, genocide, state-sponsored violence. I think that there's power to that, and I myself got into therapy like in the past year, and I realized how much being able to reflect, giving space to reflect, has helped me in my own interviews that I would do with other folks because yeah, the work that we do is very thankless. It comes from a labor of love, but it's also labor, labor, labor. It's a lot of intensity that you're bringing in, and you also want to make sure that like you're honoring people's stories. And there's a perfectionist drive in me sometimes that I had to let go of because I'm afraid that if I don't do this right, like I'm gonna ruin their story, and those things like get into my head. But Um, when you are interviewing other folks in the Cambodian community, are there things that surprises you? Are there things that really stood out for you? Like, wow, maybe I really need to lean into this, or maybe there's a part of the Cambodian culture that now I really want to get into.
Um, I don't know if it's anything that I made me want to get into, but if it's one thing that I had learned in the past 4 years of not only interviewing different Cambodian people, American Cambodians, like Cambodian Americans, but actually I've had the honor of like meeting French Cambodians, um, Belgian Cambodians. When every
Mm,
time I go to Europe or anytime I go to any other country, I like to do these in-person meetups. And I remember this one dinner that I had in Paris. It was my first time in Paris, and there's a Khmer community in France,
mhm,
right? So I it was the first time out of the country that I did one of these, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to go to Europe. Any Cambodian, French or Cambodian, whatever, want to join me at this table?" It was a table of nine of us,
wow.
nine girls who had come in, trained it. One girl trained in, like trained 12, like drove 12 hours to come meet us at this table. They were French Cambodian,
Mm,
um, all different type of European Cambodians, Dutch
mm,
Cambodian, like
wow.
all coming together at the table. There were like three, four languages going on at one time,
Wow.
but we were all Cambodian. And it was crazy because I sat there in the middle of the table looking around. Everyone was Cambodian from different countries. We grew up in completely different countries, and we sat there talking about the exact same things,
Mm,
the exact same experience of having a parent who had survived a war, having a parent who had who was either very strict or made them feel different in their country, and language barrier. We talked about identity and what it meant to feel Cambodian. Cambodian French, Cambodian American, Cambodian Dutch, and we were all, doesn't matter what country you were in, we were all connected by the same feelings. We grew up very similarly in the same way,
mm,
maybe with different flavors because it was in different countries, but it just made me realize that the diaspora is and the experience of it is universal. It doesn't matter what country you're in and
mhm,
what country your parents ended up fleeing to. We all were experiencing the exact same thing.
mhm,
And and when I saw that, I was like, wow, there's it's we're truly all connected.
mm,
Um, we're truly all connected,
mm,
and that's something that I had learned so far through this experience.
mm. What I would give to be a fly on that wall when you had that dinner. It like there's something so exciting. I'm pretty sure this has been your experience too. Like when I would run into a random Cambodian person, like, oh, are you Khmer? Oh yes, I'm Khmer. And there's this like level of excitement. Like if I see a Vietnamese person, it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess it's cool. It's not a bad
Yeah.
thing. But when it's a Khmer person, there's like this radiant energy. Like I don't feel alone. It feel there's something that's very powerful when you hear someone that's also um that also shares that same ethnicity. And like whenever I travel now, like I like to make sure that I go to a Khmer restaurant. Like I want to support a Khmer restaurant. I want Khmer food. You know, I crave it all the time. And my mom, who's Vietnamese, like she'll be asking me like, why do you always want to go to Khmer restaurants? Because like we don't really have many in Chicago. You know, we didn't have one for such a long time. Now, um, now it's like I feel like it's a mission, you know, because I also want to connect with other folks. I think
Yeah.
there's something powerful about food, and my mom's like, okay, fine, I'll go along with you, and you know, and she'll 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 join in, and she'll actually have conversations because she actually lived in Ha Tinh, which is next to Cambodia, so she was familiar with a lot of the Cambodian folks, growing up too, and luckily. She escaped, her and her family escaped before the Khmer Rouge literally came in and did a lot
Oh,
of damage there, which that is a story we don't talk about in the Kamai Rome because a lot of my dad's immediate relatives live in the Kamai Rome, and
mm,
that's a whole nother topic to dive into because that's a whole nother layer of the Khmer Rouge going into southern Vietnam and unfortunately killing a lot of Khmer folks because they were deemed poisoned by the Vietnamese government, which I didn't find that out until more recently, and that just blew me away, you
yeah.
know. And then what happened with Thailand recently? I know you had also done an episode. We you we were bringing up you were bringing up the Dangrek genocide. That
Yeah.
was the second genocide. What did you learn about that genocide? I think for viewers that don't know what that genocide was, this was like during the time of the genocide, a lot of the Khmer refugees were in Thai refugee camps, and in this case, there were Thai refugees, Thai camp guards that were forcing a lot of Khmer refugees to get out of Thailand and to go back to expatriate to Cambodia forcefully, and they were getting into the landmines and there was this hill where a lot of Cambodian folks were pushed to their deaths, and this is something that I didn't learn about until actually about maybe a year ago, actually.
Mm,
And something about it just really was so unsettling. that we had never talked about that part of history and why there have always been historical tensions between Cambodia and Thailand. And I knew that there was tensions. I knew that there were a lot of Cambodian refugees that were mistreated horribly by Thai folks, by the Thai guards. And we did not talk about this part of history, which still blows me away. And I was wondering about what was that like learning about that history and what you have been able to uncover.
Yeah, well, I first heard about it by my dad. Even though he didn't survive it, he didn't have to go through that. I remember we were one of the episodes, probably around the time that he had gotten into the Thai camps. He had mentioned off record that, there was another thing that happened. The Thai soldiers had loaded up a bus saying that it was going to Bangkok, that it was going to take them to Thailand um, to be safe. And they had loaded all these buses, but instead of taking them to safety, they drove them on top of a mountain and basically threw them off of the mountain and into the peril down the mountain. It's a very, very graphic,
Mm,
like, scene if you really took it in. And I remember I couldn't sleep that night
mm,
because I had that image in my head, like, oh my
mm,
God, like how horrific is that? You spend 3 years starving, survived a genocide finally, thought that you had made it,
mhm,
and then only to be lied to and to like literally be cascaded down a mountain and back into the landmines. And the tensions that you talk about were very real at that time because I think Thailand was like, well, it's not my genocide. Like, why do I have to take in all these people? Like, why is it our responsibility to make sure you guys are all okay? You did this to yourselves. And so there's a lot of like resentment, I think, of
mhm,
why they needed to be handling us, handling the Cambodians that were flooding out by the millions.
mm,
Um, and I think the last point to that whole thing is like, we don't have a lot of history about it because the survivors are still living and they had yet to one, it's probably culturally too. I think just
mhm,
within Asian cultures, it's hard to, I think a lot of us are taught to like not share or overshare or whatever it
mhm,
is. And that has caused a detriment, I think, to our
mhm,
storytelling,
mhm,
and our ability to collect stories. But also, as we talked about, like history has not really gave it the platform that it deserved. And so because of that, I think, and a huge mission for me and my podcast is, giving that validation where validation is due. Um,
mhm,
it was the biggest genocide of Asian genocide of the 20th century. Um, and yet there's barely a paragraph, if that, in any history books. And it was like
mhm,
not that long ago. I mean, 50 years ago was in the 70s. Like, let's be real. It's really
mhm,
not that long ago.
mhm,
Um, and there's nothing about it. And I think if I was a survivor and
mhm,
I didn't hear about it, then in my head I'm like, well, maybe it's not that important. Like maybe I don't have to say
mhm,
anything. Maybe I can just keep it in and we can just kind of forget about it and move forward, which is the way that it's been handled. But I feel like the problem with that is when you do that,
mhm,
one, nobody learns, two, nobody understands, and three, it gets passed down
mhm,
because us kids, even though as much as they try to ignore it, as we said, it still comes out in different ways. It comes out in the way they parent, in the way they fear, in the way that they speak, in the way that they um get on defense, like as you
mhm,
said, like when they use it as like a back pocket weapon almost. Whenever necessary, you can always pull out, well, you didn't survive the war. It's like,
mhm,
well, um, so it does have its effects.
mhm,
Even though they think that being silent is just gonna make it go away. So, yeah, it's crazy, and I'm so glad that James Tang had
Mhm.
really put in the work behind sharing his father's story, writing out his father's story, because we so needed that. Somebody needed to really put that on paper.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, just you talking about it, it leaves me speechless. It breaks my heart even more because like learning about what happened to the Khmer folks under Thailand was jolting. I mean, I did not realize how severe it got carried into to the death of thousands, the murder
Yeah.
of thousands, I should say. And like, what does that do for us as Cambodians still trying to heal, trying to understand and uncover parts of our history that's not still hasn't been touched? And I think I had a conversation with a Khmer friend of mine, and she had lived on and off in Cambodia and lives in Chicago, and she said that even in her hometown, no one ever talks about the genocide. There are people that don't even know that a genocide actually happened, which
Mhm.
it's startling to me because this is Cambodia. Like, how can this, like, it's not only 50 years, but it's also like the last 25 years, have they seen any kind of non-wars? I mean, so it's very perplexing, but it also tells you bad, how badly needed history has not been reaching to a lot of the Cambodian communities in the homeland. I don't know if that's something that you've experienced so far in your research or with other Cambodian folks.
Um, I I don't live in Cambodia, so
Mhm.
I don't know what is being taught in the history books, and I don't have that kind of firsthand knowledge. Um, what I do know and what I have heard is that it is um, it is a little taboo to talk a little too much about it. I I would imagine in the country that there's
Mhm.
still a lot of shame around what happened, and because it completely destroyed the country,
Mhm.
and the country itself, I mean, is still trying to heal from it in so many different ways. So it just completely destroyed the country. So I would imagine it'd be something that they're not super proud of talking about.
Mhm.
And what makes the Khmer Rouge very unique is that it's not something where somebody else did something to them, right? Like, we have the Holocaust where it was like, them against the Jews, German, but this was super rare because this is our people doing it to our own people.
Mhm.
And the problem is when you're in Cambodia, the enemies are still living amongst you.
Mhm.
Like it's not like they're over there and we're over here. And so I can imagine it being even more difficult to really talk about it deeply.
Mhm.
I almost kind of feel like we here in America might have it a tad bit easier,
Mhm.
because we have that distance. But when you're in
Mhm.
Cambodia, I would only imagine it'd be harder.
Mhm.
So I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of factors that probably come into play, and probably politics as well. Like maybe they're trying not to, because they're ashamed of it. Maybe they don't want it to be taught. Like I don't know, you
Yeah.
know. Um, it is sad what's happening. It is sad that there's not enough education around it. And
Mhm.
I'm happy that there had been some laws passed recently that the Cambodian history is now required in some counties to be taught in high school. That is just a very, very recent development
Mhm.
within the last year or two. That's super exciting. But yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy that it's not common knowledge. It's not well known about.
Yeah. And one thing I did when I was in Cambodia was I had told folks I will not do any genocide related sites. I refuse to go anywhere near it because I know that even do the museum work, there is intense feelings that I get very triggered by. And even though I didn't live through it, it's reading about it, hearing the stories, watching documentaries, it it does something to you mentally. And I feel like that what my dad feared of was definitely passed down to me. And like one thing was when I was looking at my hotel, the Do Slang, which was the S-21 torture chamber,
Right.
where thousands of Cambodian prisoners were taken in and executed. It was a mile away. And so I was Googling, I was like, okay, when I go to another place, I want to make sure when I Google map that it does not, that I am not going past it. I was very adamant about it. And I didn't want to go to Chong Ek. And I had a tour guide that was taking me to uh, the Gale. And he we were talking, he was, we had such a great conversation, and it was a private tour that I was doing. It was just me and the driver and the tour guide, and he took me on top of one of the hills. And as we got down, he said, well, I didn't want to take you to the other side of the hill because that's the killing field area. And I just felt like my heart just sank. I was like, I don't want to hear this. I can't hear this. But do you see yourself visiting or taking chances to visit these places, or how do you prepare to visit places that carries a lot of very dark history?
Well, I have visited them in middle school.
Mm,
Although again, I was in middle school, so that was quite young. I do plan on seeing them again as an adult because
mm,
as I had mentioned, I'm a different person now. I'm also an
mm,
adult. I've also gone through this project and see Cambodia in a whole new light. Um, I I would want to go. I would want to go to see how that experience would affect
mm,
me.
mm,
I am curious to see how, yeah, how it would all hit me. Um, and I am open to whatever feelings may kind of arise from that.
mm,
Um, I feel like for me personally, I think it would be important
mm,
to see those areas because at this point, since I had learned so much about it and studied and interviewed so many historians, anthropologists, um, if I go, I definitely would like to see them.
mm. And how about your father? Is he at at a place where he's able to visit those places?
He has gone back to Cambodia.
Mm,
I remember him telling me that the very first time going back to Cambodia was quite difficult for him. But
mm,
at this point in his life, he is able to go back. Um, Whether or not he's going to go and see the killing fields with me as an adult, I don't know. I haven't really asked him that yet. But he has seen them since.
mm,
And, um, he got he got emotional the last time that
mm,
he was there, and I would imagine him to be so. So
mm,
it's as I said, I'm not there, but I would imagine it
mm,
being very, very, you can feel the aura in the land, I would
mm,
imagine, of what happened there. And uh yeah, I mean, I'm glad they're still there.
mm.
At least they are preserving some sites of it so that not all history is lost.
Yeah, and something that I experienced when I was in Phnom Penh, it's like I used to watch a lot of videos of what it was before, like in the 70s and prior to that, like these French colonial buildings. And it's like when I was when my driver picked me up and taking me to my hotel, I kept having these weird, like, scenarios in my head. I'm like, gosh, I'm like living between 1973 to 1975 to now. It's like I felt like I was kind of juxtapositioning my experiences. Like, wow, it was kind of a mind fuck if I have to be very honest with you, because I get
Yeah.
so into the history. Like, gosh, this building was there back in the 50s, the 60s,
Mhm.
and it
Mhm.
survived near disrepair, and to see it still there, it's like, wow, there's something that's so powerful about that. And that was a big takeaway for me because I felt like I was going back in time, back and forth, And my friend said, just think of Cambodia as now, and but you just can't help it because I used to like watch documentaries and I would like look at my photos again. I'm like, wow, just imagine what it was like back then, to walk these streets and um where my dad used to like, hang out at with his cousin or his uncle. And yeah, it really takes you to a different place. And are you visiting other family members there? And if so, have you communicated with family members? Have you been able to brush up on the Khmer? Because I know I can't speak Khmer at all, unfortunately, and I'm actually just starting to learn Vietnamese.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't speak Khmer either. I can say that I can hear it and I can eat and I
Yes.
can actually cook. I made numpujok with my dad. Last month we were following Chef Knight's recipe
Hmm.
and it was so good, so I'm gonna make it again soon. But my Khmer is terrible. And in terms of family, we don't have any more family members who live there currently. I could be wrong. We may have like one or two like great aunts or something like that, very distant relative. Most of them are here though in America. So if I go, it's mostly going to be for meeting with the people that I
Hmm.
want to meet with, seeing the sights, seeing my you know, places where my dad maybe grew up. My dad grew up in Battambang, so
Hmm.
um, it'd be definitely more of a visiting sites, visiting people sort of trip.
Hmm. What are you most proud of as a Cambodian now?
Probably just being able to be a part of this community at the time that I feel like it's just growing and it's thriving. Um, I, as I said before, I think what's happening right now is just so rare. We are in a time of history at the 50-year mark where, again, people are asking the right questions. And I am just so privileged and thankful that I am able to be a part of that and a part of the conversations, a part of starting these conversations. It's such a joy, to be honest. It's so much fun to interview people, to have conversations like this with you, to
Hmm.
talk about, to have spaces where we can kind of dissect our identity and our lived experience together. So I'm honestly just most proud of this platform, this podcast, how far we've come,
Hmm.
how far we've gotten, and privileged to have the opportunity to continue um, creating resources where I feel like it needs to be. So I just recently got nonprofit status for the Death in Cambodia
Wow.
Life in America Foundation. And I wanted to create it because I wanted an opportunity in a better, more sustainable way to get grant money and funds because up to this point I've just been funding everything myself. It's like
Mm.
we don't make money off of this.
Right.
I don't think you make money off of your podcast either. We do this out of the goodness of our hearts,
Hmm.
but in order to make something actually happen and change, a lot of the times you do need a lot of funding. So
Hmm.
I just wanted to have the opportunity to be able to get that and continue growing the different things underneath the Deaf in Cambodia umbrella.
That's amazing. And which actually leads me to like the next question of what are we expecting of Death in Cambodia and for you in the next year, besides obviously looking to make that trip to Cambodia and to document further stories?
Yeah, so next year I had mentioned before we started the podcast that I've used this year to try to focus on in what ways I want to shift the podcast and what new things I want to do and how do I want to approach things differently. So I've decided that next year I really want to try to do more in-person events. Um, Social media is great, and I feel like we have gotten very far with it, but there is something very, very different about being in person and having in-person events and spaces. So I am trying to do like a dinner series, essentially where I would choose Cambodian restaurants in different parts of the West Coast, starting on the West Coast only because I'm here right now, but
Mhm.
maybe out in Chicago, choosing restaurants like that are being run by second generation 1.5ers who are trying to make their mark on Cambodian food, renting out spaces where Cambodians would come together and we would do a live Khmer Creators Conversations. So Khmer Creators Conversations is a program I started with a PhD licensed therapist. He is also Khmer. And we were doing for a long time these virtual online safe spaces. I have decided that I want to do them in person moving forward. So, like, actual doing in person meetups with a Cambodian PhD licensed therapist where we can talk about what it's like being and growing up Cambodian. And then I'm also thinking maybe towards the end of next year to actually host some sort of a retreat. Like it's always been my dream to actually host a retreat for Cambodian Americans and invite yoga teachers and therapists and sponsors and like all these different things where we can have a space for ourselves. So I am leaning towards and putting my energy towards doing more of that for next year.
Wow, these are really wonderful and ambitious projects you're taking on. I think that's exciting too, and I think that there's so many opportunities because I think for so long we were stuck in this deficit, in this scarcity mindset. It's like, how can we go from a start from a place of abundance? And that's something I always think about. Like, how can we step into ourselves, step into different spaces? And I think what you're doing is amazing. And last question, what would you tell your young self 6 years ago before you started this podcast?
Mm, I'd probably tell her that it's not going to be just my great grandkids who are going to be listening to these stories and this podcast. It's going to be actually a lot of people. And and this is going to be the start of a journey that I never thought that I would embark on. I started this podcast and I clicked record with my dad thinking, oh, we'll just keep these for ourselves. Maybe we'll release it and maybe like 10 listeners will listen and that'll be that. And it has turned into this whole new world and it's given me so much purpose. Um, and I've had so much I've just had so much of meaning has come out of this project and this umbrella that and and so I would tell her, you have no idea what's coming. No idea.
That is amazing. And thank you so much for your time being on my podcast. And to every listener, please check out Death in Cambodia, which is available on all streaming, and continue to hear stories from the Cambodian experience and other content creators that are doing this much needed work. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, Dorothy.
Thank you for having me.